What if the universe wasn't out there, but in here, reflecting every hidden emotion, every forgotten truth? Let's listen to Robert Edward Grant as he unpacks time, authenticity, and the real reason you're here.
Well, the good news is they're basically from you. It's just the other side, the part of you that's behind the veil. You know, you could call it your subconscious or your unconscious mind. And it's the you inverse. I don't tend to believe that the universe is separate from each of us. I believe that it is us. And in fact, it's just what's being reflected in our outer world related to our emotions. Those emotions that we have that are stored within us, that we're aware of, as well as the emotions we're not even aware of. And it all just gets magnified in this outer world as a reflection back to us. And so when we see synchronicities and the source code of all of this is like computer code, it's very similar and it's numerical. And so as a result, the way that you can communicate with that other aspect of you, your higher self, as it were, is through synchronicities. And so the synchronicities show up and then you're like, okay, and I'll know very often if all of a sudden, you know, I'm driving down the street and I see a car in front of me that's got a license plate that says Alpha Omega 73, right? Which I actually will see that. It'll have AO or AXO 73. And I'll be like, and whatever I'm talking about at that moment is something that I need to pay extra attention to. Or whatever emotion I'm feeling at that moment is what I need to pay extra attention to. It's kind of like whenever you get, I'm sure you probably experienced this, one of those sort of extrasensory perception things where you'll get like chills up your back and along your arms and everything. You're like, ooh, and you just know that, wait, there's something more to this. And your higher self is basically telling you, pay attention. This is for you. And those synchronicities could literally be happening all around us and we're just simply not aware of it. But I tend to believe that at the right time for us to find those synchronicities is when we start finding them and they find us. You know, I tend to think that time is like a torus or a mobius strip. Are you familiar with what a mobius strip is? So do you remember when you were in like elementary school and they would like make these around Halloween time, usually they'd like take a strip of that kind of colored paper and then they'd make a bracelet around your arm with it, right? Well, if you twist the paper, right, you'll have a twist right in the middle of the bracelet. But if you twist it another half turn, so you end up twisting it, you know, not 360 degrees, but actually 540 degrees. So you twist it all the way, 540 degrees. Then what you end up with is a mobius where it becomes like imagine a racetrack where you drive on one side of the paper, but because it's twisted, you end up on both sides of the paper, right? I believe that's what time and DNA actually is. So think about DNA, how it twists, right? And how it's this double helix structure. Well, all of our past lives and all of our future lives are embedded right within our DNA. It's literally accessible to us. So what we consider as time is really just the limitation that we have on our perception, I believe, right? I believe that we are dimensionally limited avatars, dimensionally limited purposefully into this fourth dimensional space, which is the third dimension of depth and the fourth dimension of time, which is measured, you know, through, we look at it as motion, but we measure it through time. So what we consider then our past and our future is just another form of duality that we are persistently perceiving because we're only seeing time going one direction. We don't understand that the paper twists and that it goes both directions. So in this context, if we think of time as a torus, in fact, scientists often would say this, that if you shot a photon, right, and photons don't actually travel, but that's another discussion, but let's say you shined a light to the edge of the universe. Ostensibly, what should happen, because the universe is shaped in a toroidal shape, it should boomerang eventually back to you. Right? It may take a super, super long time to come back to you, but eventually, because it's shaped like that, it should come back to you. Well, who's to say that time isn't the same? That what we consider our distant past is simultaneously also our distant future. And in a matrix of mind, it can only be that. Because we have no problem to understand that the past and the present can determine the future. But when we start to think about it from the context of, okay, well, the past and the present determine the future, yes, but Does that also mean somehow, are you saying, Robert, that the future and the present also determine the past? And yes. And I'm going to give you concrete examples of what I mean by that. When you've probably had something that's been terrible that's happened in your life, right? Where you've gone through a bout of sadness or maybe even depression or something. But you've probably looked back on that at certain points in time and said, whoa, that was like the hardest moment of my life. But then, with the benefit of some more time, it doesn't quite seem as bad as it was. And probably at a certain stage, you're going to be like, wow, I dodged a bullet. Right? And then you might even get to the point where you eventually look back on it and say, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. But in life, what happens to us is not what actually happens to us, it's what we believe happened to us. And so we make an interpolation, we make an interpretation of what happens to us, these events that occur. And everyone's going to have a subjective reference because everyone has their own, what I would call some sort of conditioning bias. Whatever that conditioning bias is will determine how you will react to this type of situation. As such, history changed for you. Because what was really the history? The history was the emotions that you felt ascribed to that moment in time. And those emotions, each one of us, are acting like blockchain validators and validating that emotional state. That's what the Akashic is. The Akashic record is basically everyone's different emotional states for what they believe happened to them. And as those emotional states get collected, you can actually change history by changing how you perceive what happened. And then history altogether changes. So the past determines the future, but the future in that context determines the past, because now your past and your emotional state is now no longer this sullen, heavy, very sobering. Instead, if you think about like the best part of superhero movies, the best part is when they start figuring out that they have superpowers. And when they realize that they have these superpowers, then you're like on this journey of discovering what other powers do they have. Spider-Man can climb walls, but what else can he do? Can he shoot a spider web out or something? That's what we're going through right now. We're starting to realize that there are things that are embedded within our own DNA that are unrealized potentialities within each of us. We're starting to realize that even Earth has a 5D and possibly even a 6th-dimensional history that we're unable to perceive because it's in the 5th and 6th dimension. Is that what Atlantis and Lemuria actually are? They're hidden from our vision and they're no longer in our history because they were in higher dimension. And as we raise our consciousness and go to higher dimension, then all of a sudden we start finding all these remnants of this lost civilization. You follow what I'm saying? We're dimensionally limited avatars, and we're here to learn through emotional states in this game that we call life, that is a spiritual life simulation game. And that simulation game is meant for us to up-level our consciousness and remember and find all these abilities within ourselves, because that's the most fun part of the game. But without the contrast, without the negativity, without the darkness, without all the challenge, without the divorces, without all the stuff that happens in our lives, it wouldn't have the same weightiness. Because a fundamental principle of a successful spiritual life simulation game would be materiality and objectivity. That becomes the basis of the whole thing. It's like, okay, so we have to believe in materiality and objectivity. Well, as we start to ascend in our consciousness, we realize actually that the world is a lot less material and objective. And then we start realizing actually it's mental and subjective. And what I thought were facts were merely facets of a larger truth that I just didn't have access to. So every day I'm unlearning what I've learned. This informs our history, it informs our present, it informs our future. And if you want to change the world, change how you perceive the world. I believe that we chose, like, every detail is chosen and not before, but in the now. In that place, there is no time, there's no past, and there's no future. There's just all now. And it's almost like the movie's already written for us. We're just given the benefit of seeing it play one way. You can find it all in your astrology. You can find it all in your numerology. If you dig deeper, you can find it in your human design. If you dig deeper still, you can find it in your gene keys, right? And if you dig deeper still, you can even find it in mythology. And what you'll find is that all of these archetypes of challenge that you face are all predetermined in our context of what's pre. But again, it's you that's chosen it all. Because all that's happened is you're in an avatar right now, call it a meat suit, and the meat suit is not able to access the higher self, except for through synchronicities, except for through those moments of samadhi, except for through the still point that you find in meditation. And as you start tapping into that more and more, then you're actually merging, and this also comes through hemisynchronization of the brain, the left and right hemispheres of the brain, and being heart-led, what leads to authenticity. And that is actually where we all want to get to in this existence, is pure and unadulterated authenticity. There was some research I just read recently about, which emotional state carried the highest sort of amplitude along with it, so that people could all feel. And I thought it was going to be love. It was actually authenticity. Because authenticity, I realized, is love. So if you think about it, we have chakras. Our lowest chakra, and I've struggled for a long time, is, okay, what's the opposite of love? What's the opposite of love? And I thought, okay, is it hatred? It didn't really quite feel right for some reason. Is it fear? Right? And okay, that could also be courage. There's a lot of things that didn't really match. And I know a lot of people that claim to hate someone actually love the person, right? There's a love-hate relationship that can exist there. So I started realizing maybe there's something more. And the nuance of this was that the lowest chakra, the root, is where we have our highest degree of conditionality being here on earth. And conditionality comes from the word kon, right? I just did a podcast with Matthias and we talked about this. And conditionality is kon, it implies with or co. In order for the one to perceive itself, just like an eye can't see itself without the aid of a mirror, the one has to divide itself in order to perceive itself. And it creates a mirror. So it creates a mirror between you and me. We're separate, but we're not actually separate. These are just reflections. You represent an aspect inside of me that I'm not fully aware of. And the reason why you come into my field is so that I can integrate and understand that aspect of it and learn how to accept all of it as well. So as we go through the chakra system, you could say that the root chakra would be like 1 part love and 6 parts conditionality or judgment. And the basis and foundation of everything is duality. Duality exists in all higher dimensions too. It's not that it goes away. It's like trying to say, okay, yeah, once you moved up an octave and you're in a higher dimensional state, then all the lower dimensional stuff goes away. Not really. That'd be like looking at an advanced or what we would call a hyperpolytope, right? So, you've got a hyperpolytope, and these hyperpolytopes are higher dimensional, but the second dimension's still there. It's still part of the drawing, right? It's still part of the same geometric form. You can't get away from that. There's no getting away from it. You have to have it. And so what happens is we start to realize that as we go up the chakras, each chakra becomes another dimension. So you got the first dimension, which is a line. The second dimension becomes a sacral, and it forms the shape of an X, right? Or a cross. So you've got the line of masculine and the vertical line of the feminine. Also represents where heaven and earth meet. Then you go to the sacral, and the sacral now gives us depth. So I've got a Z-axis, and no longer just the X and Y axis, now got a Z-axis coming across it as well. And then we go to the fourth dimension, which is the heart chakra. So the heart chakra represents our relationship with time. We have to realize that everything in this universe is all about now, and we're just persistently seeing it only going one direction from a time perspective. So once we start to realize and transcend and understand that now the heart is the first time it's 4 parts love and 3 parts judgment, you tip the balance. That allows you the next entry into time. The throat chakra, 5 parts love, 2 parts judgment. That becomes a bridge between the heart and the brain. And that's when you start to get in the 5th dimension, the 5th chakra, the 5th dimension. So now you've got a pentaract, right? So you've got a tesseract in the 4th dimension, and you've got a pentaract in the fifth dimension. They just don't necessarily know it. And we have different types of narcissism. We have covert and we have overt narcissism. And overt would be more like we associate with, in popular culture and in psychology, but in psychology as well, they understand covert narcissism. A covert narcissist is one who says, oh, I can't go out tonight because, I'm like just completely sad about all the rainforest being depleted. And you understand what it's like to be me as an empath. I've got to basically live with this and my life is difficult. And then everyone is expected to kind of fawn over them, right? And this is covert narcissism. They just don't even know it, right? You could be so empathic that it's kind of like intolerance. At a certain level, you become so tolerant that you become intolerant of intolerance. So people that say, oh no, we should have tolerance everywhere, but then they become intolerant of intolerance itself. You see what I'm saying? You see, that's how it's like the piece of paper that's being twisted. That's the twist part of the loop. When you become intolerant of intolerance, right? This is sort of the far degree of duality. So as we go up the chakras and we're moving more and more towards this, what we're really getting towards is removal of the mask. Because as we live our lives, we're born into separation. We want to be with our mother, but we can't be with our mother anymore at the same time. And so, we're out of the womb and we start living all these different things that build our ego, that build our separation, that build our persona. We have to learn how to cope. We have to create coping mechanisms and all of this for traumas that we experience. And then what happens is we get to about 40 years old, 35, you have a narrow brush with like disaster when you're late 20s. And then you get into like 40s and you're like, okay, why does it seem like that the whole world is not like I thought it was? Like everything seems off. And so then you start realizing that it seems like you're surrounded by assholes. And then you finally notice the correlation that, wait a minute, if I'm surrounded by assholes, am I the asshole? So you're starting to become self-aware. And this is when your life really starts to shift. Because then you start realizing all the stuff that you thought were facts were really just facets. And that what you had done is you had pushed all the things that you were not. So I am not that thing. I am not this, I'm not that. And you push it out of your personality into the outer world around you. And so the net result of that is you just keep finding the same things that you judged in yourself. And, I felt the same way. It's like I finally woke up one day and noticed that all the things I'd been judging were things that I didn't like about myself. So this is when the narcissist starts to realize the narcissism is really just the fullest expression of your persona, the mask. And once you get to the higher chakras, what you're really then given is the opportunity to see yourself in truth, the full self, the dark aspects, the things that you don't even want to recognize about yourself. Narcissism is not true self-love. Narcissism is conditional love of the self. You think that you're only projecting one aspect of yourself and you want to hide all the rest. So as you get to the highest chakra, what you get to is not really just pure unconditionality, but it's authenticity. Because now you know who you are and you accept who you are. And authenticity is the path of enlightenment. It's when you become totally authentic and you're not worried about, you're not putting on airs to people. You can be completely vulnerable. You show up, your heart chakra is open, wide open, and you just don't give a shit what everyone else is going to think. You're just going to express authentically. And that expression of pure authenticity has a huge impact on everyone in the world around you. Because a lot of people, fall in this trap of saying, oh, I was so bad. I did all these things wrong. I'm not good enough. Therefore, I'm going to change. My family has all this karma. Did you know that, somewhere back in my history, they did really horrible things? So then they're like, I'm going to change my name. That's the manifestation of it. So I'm going to change it to something like the One or Light or something like that. And because I don't want to associate with any of that bad part of my karmic history. I don't want to carry any karmic debt. Well, the fact is, the individuation path is just learning pure and perfected authenticity. That's what the aeon is. That's what Carl Jung's individuation path actually is when you can fully know yourself and accept it. And it's not good enough to just say, no, it's unconditional love, love and light, love and light. No, that's not what this is about. Because if you don't know your own darkness fully, it's easy to say love and light. It's when you know fully your own darkness and can fully accept it and have experienced it in a spiritual life simulation game that is built around experiential learning, which is exactly what we're all here doing. I believe it's more like this. I believe that the one divides itself in the many for the joy of perceiving itself through our unique eyes of perception, each one of us being totally different. So that's your unique purpose, is to experience life and fill the Akashic record, right? Inform the Akashic record through your emotional states based on your unique conditioning biases. And as your conditioning biases evolve and your belief systems evolve, and you start to realize that the only cage that you live in is the one, your consciousness can only expand to the volume of the cage of your belief systems, whatever that is, right? And once you start to understand all these things, then you can start to see, hey, wait a minute, this has been me all along. I somehow chose all of this down to like abject level detail. But let's say there's a theme that you wanted to learn or you have noticed in your life. Let's say I wanted to learn unconditional love throughout my life. Unconditional love, or maybe a better way to put it is not even unconditional love. Maybe it's authentic love. Truly authentic love. Love on top of the authenticity that was the highest amplitude of all of our emotional states. That's what it's all about. So if I'm here to learn truly authentic love, then I'm going to be inundated in my lifetime through the experience of opposites of that thing, because every time I judge love conditionally, I'm going to judge the negative aspects of it, the fake love, right? I'm going to judge betrayal negatively. And it's only through understanding that the moment that I finally can learn to accept and integrate betrayal and not have this immediate like recoil and say, I'm not that. I would never leave a man down. I would never hurt someone like this. I would never betray them like that. It's only when you finally can recognize and say to yourself, yeah, I can accept the betrayal. I'm not condoning it. I'm simply accepting that it exists and that it must exist in order for there to be unconditional love or truly authentic love. The moment that you finally can learn to accept betrayal, when you see it happen to someone else or see it happening to yourself, is the moment that you finally learn unconditional love. And until that moment, you haven't learned it. So from that context, whatever you've chosen to learn and integrate in this lifetime, which I believe we are given that, it leads, along with our conditioning biases and everything else, to a cascade of events that are uniquely suited to each one of these archetypes. Yeah, and usually what happens is the way the universe will deal with your emotions is that the things that you judge will simply continue to get attracted by you. So we'll attract everything we judge until we no longer judge what we attracted. So the world all of a sudden gets populated with all these things that you're judging negatively until you finally realize, oh, wait, this is just me out there